Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The wind carried dust across the basin, and the sun burned low behind the hills when Holden hardly heard the sound in his wagon soft, like cloth brushing wood. He froze, one boot on the wagon step, fingers curled tight around the handle of a feed sack. The horses stomped, restless. His rifle lay slung across the saddle, too far to grab without turning his back. Slowly, Holden stepped up onto the wagon bed and lifted the canvas flap. A girl, no. A woman sprang from the shadows with a knife in her hand and wild in her eyes. Her dress was torn at the hem, one sleeve ripped. Her hair was tangled and damp with sweat. She held the blade like she meant to use it. "I thought you were him," she said, breath catching in her throat. Holden raised both hands, calm and slow. "I ain't," she blinked, eyes darting to his hat, his boots, the worn trail dust on his shirt. "He's wearing blue, you're not him." "I ain't wearing blue, no." Holden's voice stayed steady. "You got a name." She didn't answer right away. The knife trembled in her grip. She was small, but not a child older than she looked, maybe 20, maybe more. Her face was drawn tight with fear that had settled deep. She finally said, "Sadie." "All right, Sadie," Holden said gently. "I'm gonna sit down here, not gonna touch nothing. You can keep hold of that knife if it makes you feel better, but I'd like to know who you're hiding from." Sadie's shoulders sagged. She lowered the knife just a little. "I ran," she said. "He had no right. He said I belonged to him. I do not." Holden nodded slowly. "That man hurt you." Her silence was answer enough. He sat on the edge of the wagon, careful not to glance away from her. "You hungry?" Sadie's stomach answered for her with a low growl. She flushed and looked down. Holden reached into the flour sack beside him and tore off a chunk of biscuit. He slid it across the wagon floor with 2 fingers. Sadie grabbed it fast, like a starving cat, and ate like she had not in days. "You can stay the night," he said. "I will keep watch. Ain't nobody gonna touch you while I breathe." Sadie looked up, doubt flickering behind her tired eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Holden shrugged. "Because I got a sister somewhere out east, and I'd want someone to help her if she was in trouble." She settled back against the wagon wall, still clutching the knife, but her grip had eased. Her eyes stayed on Holden as he fed the horses and stoked the fire. When he brought her a canteen of water, she whispered, "Thank you," like the words were foreign. That night, Holden slept outside the wagon with his rifle across his lap. The stars hung low and sharp above the plains. Coyotes howled somewhere distant. He did not sleep much. By morning, the storm clouds had lifted from the horizon, and Sadie stepped down from the wagon in the same ragged dress, but her shoulders were straighter. "I will not go back," she said. "Then do not," Holden replied simply. "You got somewhere to go," Sadie hesitated. "No, he burned my papers, took my horse." Holden chewed his cheek, thinking. "I am headed north past Buffalo. There is a ranch near Clear Creek that could use help. You got a mind to work. I can sew. Cook too," she said. "That will do." They rode together under the hot sun, Holden on his bay gelding, Sadie tucked in the wagon. She rode with the knife close at hand. Holden did not mind. He spoke little, asked less. She watched him, wary at first, then with a quiet curiosity. 2 days later, she told him more. "His name was Roy," she said, voice low. "I was working out near Rawlins for a family with 3 little ones. He came through with a cattle drive. He watched me too long, followed me behind the barn, and said I was his now. I told him no." He laughed. Holden's face turned to stone. "You got away," she nodded. "Last week, I waited until he passed out drunk, took his knife, ran into the dark, and never looked back." "You did right," Holden said, voice rough. "You fought. She stared at him for a long moment. You do not look at me like I am broken. I do not think you are. The trail grew easier after that. They talked more. She started helping with camp, gathering wood, warming beans, brushing down the horses. She laughed once, and he nearly dropped his coffee pot from the shock of it. On the fifth night, rain hit hard, and Holden let her sleep under the wagon tarp while he stayed outside. In the dark, she spoke through the canvas. I thought you were him that first night, she said. When you opened the flap, I was shaking so hard. I saw, Holden replied. You were brave. I am tired of being afraid. Then lean on me, he said without thinking, a pause. Then, softly, all right. They crossed the Bighorn foothills by the seventh day. The land was wide and golden, dotted with pines and grazing elk. Holden stopped beneath a ridge and pointed. Clear Creek's just beyond that rise. The ranch is 3 miles up. The woman there, Mrs. Halley, she runs it with her son. Good people, Sadie nodded. She looked toward the hills, then back at him. And you? I will stay nearby for a while. Make sure you settle in all right. She swallowed. You do not have to. I want to. That night they made camp one last time on the flat stretch near the creek. As the fire popped and the sky turned violet, Sadie sat beside him, closer than usual. You remind me of someone, she said. My brother before he died. He was quiet like you. Good. Holden looked into the fire. I have been alone a long time, Sadie. She turned to him. So have I. He reached out slowly, offering not touch but presence. You are safe now. Sadie leaned her head against his shoulder. I think I believe you. Holden did not move. He just let her rest there, warm and real against him. They sat like that until the fire burned down, and not once did she look over her shoulder. The Halley Ranch sat low against the hills, its fences weathered but mended, its barn red, stained, and solid. A milk cow stood tethered near the lean-to, and the scent of hay drifted on the air. When Sadie stepped down from the wagon, her boots touched Wyoming soil not as a fugitive, but something nearer to a woman with choices. Mrs. Halley met them on the porch, sleeves rolled and apron dusted with flour. Her eyes flicked from Holden to Sadie, assessing quick and kind. She yours? She asked Holden. No, ma'am, he said. She's her own. Mrs. Halley nodded once. Good, I got pie dough waiting and dishes piled since dawn. If she can lift a skillet, she's hired. Sadie followed her inside without looking back. Holden unsaddled his gelding and led him to the creek. He rubbed down the animal slowly, watching the house through the cottonwoods. He didn't need to stay long, but he didn't ride out either. By dusk, Sadie appeared on the porch with a basin of water, sleeves pinned up, her hair pulled back with a piece of string. She didn't speak, just sat by the steps and soaked her hands. Her fingers looked red from scrubbing. Holden leaned against the fence. You all right? She nodded. She works hard, expects the same. I like her. Good. You still heading north? She asked. Not yet. Sadie glanced over, uncertain. Why not? Holden's gaze drifted toward the ridge. Horses need rest. Her mouth twitched, almost like she wanted to smile. You're lying. Maybe. That night, Mrs. Halley fed them stew thick with barley and onions. Her son, Tobias, spoke little. He was maybe 11, thin and quick-eyed, already strong enough to carry buckets 2 at a time. After supper, Holden helped him split kindling while Sadie dried pans by lantern light. Later, as the house quieted, she stepped out onto the porch again, arms folded tight against the chill. You don't talk much, she said. Only when I have something worth saying. She watched him a moment. That man I told you about, Roy, he found me once before I got away for good. Caught me behind the smokehouse and told me I'd never outrun him. He laughed like it was already settled. Holden stood still. I hit him with a sack of flour, she said, voice low. Ran while he was coughing. I made it to the creek and hid in the reeds till morning. She leaned against the post. I think sometimes that I should have killed him, that maybe I still should. Holden looked at her, long and quiet. I ain't gonna tell you what to feel, he said, but you did what you had to. You kept yourself alive. Sadie's jaw worked. He's out there, and I don't want to keep looking over my shoulder. You won't have to, Holden said. How can you know that? Because I'm not going anywhere till I'm sure you don't have to. The lantern in the window flickered. Crickets sang in the grass. Sadie sat on the steps, pulling her knees close. I almost forgot what it felt like, being treated like I'm worth something. Holden crossed the yard and sat beside her. You don't forget. You just stop expecting it. She turned her face toward him, shadows curling under her eyes. And you, what did you stop expecting? He thought on that a while. Peace. They didn't speak again for a long while. The stars wheeled overhead, and the wind rattled dry leaves across the porch. When she stood to go inside, she paused. If I asked you to stay longer, would you? I already am, he said. Sadie nodded once, then disappeared into the house. Holden stayed on the porch till the light in the kitchen went out. Only then did he lay his bedroll beneath the overhang and let himself rest. He dreamt of nothing, just quiet, just warmth. In the morning, Sadie handed him a tin cup of coffee before he asked. She didn't speak, but her eyes held steady on his as he took it. He nodded. She nodded back. And that was more than enough. By the second week, the rhythm of the ranch had settled into Sadie's bones. She rose before the rooster, rolled biscuits with cold hands, and learned the names of every milk cow and broodmare. Her palms toughened, her voice deepened with use, and she no longer startled when Tobias dropped a shovel or when the wind slammed the barn door. Holden stayed on in the outer bunkhouse, mending fence lines and helping Tobias train the young colts. He never said how long he meant to remain, and Sadie never asked. But each evening he'd linger after supper, sometimes helping her stack kindling or wipe down the stovetop, sometimes just sitting quiet as she stitched worn seams back into shape. One afternoon, the sky dimmed early, and a soft drizzle began to fall over the pasture. Sadie stood in the barn sorting sacks of feed when Holden stepped inside, shaking his hat off by the door. "You ever been to the Tettons?" he asked, voice low beneath the patter of rain on the roof. She glanced up. No, only heard of them in passing. They're bigger than they look from a distance, cold even in August. There's a lake up there that don't warm clear through the summer. I'd like to see that, she said, brushing dust from her skirt. Do you go often? Just once, he said. I was younger, thought the mountains might hold something I'd lost. Did they? He leaned against the stall gate. No, but sometimes the trying's worth more than the finding. Sadie tied off a sack and set it aside. You don't speak like a man who spent his years on horseback. I read some, Holden said. Used to keep a book tucked under the bedroll, pages wore thin from dust and weather. What kind of book? He hesitated. Poems, mostly, Sadie blinked. Truly, I reckon I liked the quiet in them. Like a river under the ice. She stepped closer, her hands still dusted with grain. Would you remember one? Holden's eyes stayed on the rafters, but his voice came steady. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Sadie finished the line with him, her voice just above a whisper. And miles to go before I sleep. They stood still for a moment, the barn heavy with the scent of hay and horses, the rain soft and unhurried. That was my brother's favorite, she said. I thought it might have been. She looked at him then, not guarded, not questioning, just open in a way she hadn't been when she'd first stepped down from his wagon. "I've never met a man who'd speak poetry in a barn," she said. "I've never met a woman who'd match the lines without pause." Later that evening, Sadie brought a bowl of stew out to Holden where he sat on the bunkhouse step, his boots muddy from the creek. She handed it over without a word, then sat beside him, her knees drawn close. The sky had cleared, and the stars pushed through the thinning clouds. Tobias's laughter drifted faintly from the main house, and a whippoorwill called from the trees. Sadie picked at her hem. "When I was little, I'd climb the roof of our cabin and pretend the stars were lanterns hung by someone who lived above the clouds. I'd name them like neighbor's old man Harris, Widow Clark, the preacher's youngest." Holden smiled faintly. "You still name them?" "Not yet." She looked over at him. "But I might start again." He didn't reply, just passed her the bowl after he'd finished half. She took it, brushed her fingers where his had been, and ate without rushing. When their hands touched again, it was not accidental, and neither of them pulled away. By late September, the high grass yellowed, and the air turned thin with the edge of coming cold. Holden carried water from the spring before first light. Sadie had taken to walking the orchard row behind the barn when her morning tasks were done, her hands brushing the brittle leaves as if they might still hold summer. One morning, she found Holden near the paddock, checking the latch on the far gate. His coat was worn at the cuffs, and there was a new scrape above his knuckle that hadn't been there the day before. "You were out late last night," she said, stopping beside him. "Had to ride out a ways," he replied. "Something spooked the cattle near the ridge. Might be a cougar prowling again." "Did you see tracks?" "Only scat. Fresh, though. I'll set traps come dusk." Sadie leaned into the fence rail. "You ever think about settling somewhere permanent?" Holden didn't answer right away. He tested the hinge, then said, "I used to think I would. Before the war, I thought I'd run a place like this, maybe with a partner, someone I could build with." She studied his face. "What changed?" "Too many years on the move. I started thinking I wasn't made for staying." Sadie turned to the hills. "You're steady as any man I've known." His voice came quiet. "That don't mean I don't doubt myself." She looked back at him. "I doubt myself every day, but I know what I want now." Holden's gaze met hers. "Tell me." "I want a place I don't have to leave. I want to work until I sleep and wake up knowing the same roof's above me. I want to sit beside someone who doesn't need to fill the silence." He said nothing for a long stretch. Then, "I could be that man, if you'd let me." She didn't speak, but she reached for his hand, and he let her take it. That afternoon, while Tobias practiced his roping in the far pasture, Sadie climbed the ladder to the loft and brought down a bundle wrapped in a threadbare shawl. She found Holden in the lean-to, sharpening his blade on a whetstone. "I've got something," she said. He stood, wiping his hands. "What's that?" "Proof I've got more to me than a knife and a name." She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small leather-bound book and a folded map, creased and stained. "My brother's journal. He kept it with him until he died. I found it in March, hidden under the floorboards of the cabin after Roy left for a cattle fair. He used to talk about homesteading land near the Bighorns, said the soil was rich and the wind kinder there." Holden took the book carefully. The cover was cracked, the ink faded with time. "His writing's finer than mine," he said. "He wanted me to go there, start something of my own. I was afraid back then. I'm not anymore." Holden held the map open with both hands. "That land's still open, but it's wild, no guarantees." "I don't want guarantees," she said. "Just a chance." He folded the map again, slower this time. "Would you want me there?" She didn't look away. I wouldn't ask otherwise. They packed supplies over the next 3 days. Mrs. Hallie lent them a canvas tent and a second mule. Tobias carved a lucky token from pine and tucked it in Sadie's satchel when he thought she wasn't looking. She kissed his cheek anyway. Their last evening on the ranch, Sadie stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse with her belongings bundled at her feet. "You sure?" Holden asked, his voice low. She stepped forward, closing the space between them. "I never was, until I met you." He took her into his arms, not in haste, but with care arms around her like she was something he'd been waiting to carry his whole life. That night they lay under canvas and stars, the fire throwing shadows on the walls. Her head fit beneath his chin, and their breath rose and fell together. She traced the line of his wrist with her fingers, then his forearm, learning him in silence. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "You're building," he said. They left before dawn, Wagon creaking under the weight of seed, tools, and quiet hope. The trail led west, into a land neither of them had seen, but both had pictured too many nights to count. And this time, when Sadie looked ahead, she did not look back. They arrived at the basin 3 days before frost settled into the soil. The land had been untouched for seasons, no fencing yet, only a scatter of cottonwoods near the creek and a wide rise of grass that bowed in the wind like prayer. Sadie stepped down from the wagon and pressed her hand to the earth. It was damp, dark, and full of promise. Holden led the mule to water while Sadie walked the perimeter of what would become their home. She counted distance by steps, then by heartbeats. They pitched the canvas tent beside a cluster of granite boulders, the only shelter until they raised walls. That first night, they built a fire behind a windbreak and ate cold beans from a tin. The stars were pale with frost, and the silence was full of breath. Holden didn't sleep much. He kept one ear turned toward the horses and one hand resting against Sadie's back, steady as the ground beneath them. By the second week, they dug out a cellar and framed the base for a single-room cabin. Sadie hauled stones from the creek while Holden split pine he'd felled from a ridge 2 miles east. Their hands blistered, then calloused. Each night, Sadie rubbed tallow into Holden's shoulders, and he pressed kisses into her hair without needing to ask. "You ever think about children?" she asked one evening as she stitched muslin into curtain lengths. He set down the drawknife. "Sometimes, not for a long while. I used to think it'd be too dangerous. To bring someone into the world when you're always looking behind you." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "And now, I think I'd like to raise someone who never learns what that kind of fear feels like." Holden nodded once. "Then we'll make a place safe enough for that." The cabin grew slowly. They raised the walls beam by beam. The hearth was built from stone Sadie laid herself, and Holden carved the door latch from a twisted limb he'd found after a storm. When the roof went up, they stood side by side and watched the smoke from their first fire curl into the sky. Sadie touched the lintel and whispered something Holden didn't hear, but he saw the way her shoulders lowered, like she'd finally set down a weight she'd carried too far. They kept to themselves that first winter. The snow came early and stayed hard. Holden trapped rabbits and patched his coat with buckskin. Sadie lined the windows with wool, baked bread from the last stores of flour, and read aloud from her brother's journal when the winds howled too loud to sleep. Some nights, they talked until the fire died. Other nights, they didn't need words at all. By spring, Sadie's hands had grown strong enough to lift fence rails without pause. She planted beans, squash, and corn in 3 neat rows, each seed pressed with care. Holden built a smokehouse from scrap pine and wired the chicken pen by hand. They worked until the sun dipped behind the hills, then bathed in the creek and shared supper in the open air. Late one May afternoon, as Sadie hung linens on the line, Holden stepped out of the shed with something wrapped in oilcloth. He walked to her, brushed a curl from her cheek, and pressed the bundle into her hands. She unfolded it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple brass, shaped in the likeness of a sage leaf cast from a mold he'd carved himself. Her breath caught. "You made this," he nodded. "I've been waiting for the right moment. I didn't think I needed anything more than what we have." "You don't," he said, "but I do. I want to stand beside you and know that everything we built came from something we chose freely." She looked down at the ring, then up into his eyes. "Then put it on me." He did, with hands that had held her through every storm. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "I choose you." That summer they married beneath the cottonwoods, just the two of them and the creek as witness. Sadie wore a dress she'd sewn from flour sacks and lace scraps. Holden wore his father's vest. They spoke vows without scripture, just words they meant spoken plain. By first frost, the baby was on the way. Sadie felt it one morning while grinding corn, a shift inside her that rooted her deeper to the land. She told Holden by placing his hand against her belly and waiting. When she saw his eyes go soft, she knew she'd never again be alone in this world. Years passed. The cabin grew to hold 3 rooms. A cradle rocked beside the hearth, and Tobias, now nearly grown, came each spring to help with planting. Mrs. Hallie visited once, her hair silvered, her hands still work rough, and held Sadie's daughter like she was her own kin. Sadie taught the child to sew, to plant by the moon, to speak with care. Holden taught her how to listen to the trees, how to ride bareback, and how to start a fire with one match. They built a life not from what they'd fled, but from what they chose day after day, year after year. They never spoke Roy's name again. Not because they forgot, but because he no longer held weight in the life they'd made. In the quiet moments, Holden would sit with Sadie on the porch, her hand in his, and watch the sun dip below the ridge. They didn't talk much in those hours. They didn't have to. They had peace, and they had each other. They had everything.